Okay, so cannabis or marijuana contains cannabinoids. These are the chemicals, the psychoactive chemicals, and we've heard of many, things like THC, for example, and CBD, which stands for cannabidiol. There's also CBN, cannabinol. It turns out about 100 plus. Some papers suggest 120 distinct cannabinoid chemicals in the plant cannabis, depending on the specific strain. And these are called phytocannabinoids. Phyto means plant. So these are plant-derived cannabinoid chemicals, that can have action at specific receptors, in our nervous system. We also, it turns out, generate endogenous cannabinoids. So these are chemicals that our own cells produce that are released that will act at cannabinoid receptors. But the phytocannabinoids, what's fascinating about cannabis is that, depending on the strain, you can have a really unique and interesting mix of all of these different, potentially psychoactive, phytocannabinoids, depending on the particular strain. So, there's a lot of research that still needs to be done on what are all these different, phytocannabinoids doing, and how do they act with each other as well. There could be what they call sort of synergistic kind of interactions that can influence drug action and, ultimate effect. In addition, these plants are complicated. They also have, a lot of other classes of compounds, including a whole, class called terpenes. And there's a lot of interest and research in how, the interactions of these various phytocannabinoids and these also plant-derived terpenes and other classes of chemical within the cannabis plant, might interact to produce different effects depending on the strain. There are what are called Landrace strains, and these are actually, sort of like the more historic strains that, grew in different, parts of the world. But cannabis is a very, very genetically altered, plant. There have been, significant efforts to, breed selectively, to mostly increase, the availability of THC in many of the strains that you get. You'll often hear about, for example, indica strains versus sativa strains. But if you read some of the research, and I put some links in here, those are almost meaningless. I mean, you can talk about, a plant with like broader leaves, that's shorter is likely an indica, and those that are taller with the narrower leaves are sativas, and the indicas are supposed to help you go to sleep, and the, sativas are supposed to kind of alert you and, add to creativity and all these things. But actually, to be honest, it turns out that there's a tremendous amount of variability in the phytocannabinoid and terpene and other, chemical constituents of all of these individual plants. And it's really hard, to make a clear distinction. In fact, I remember, in some state laws, it's required that there is testing of the phytocannabinoid content, specifically with regards to THC and CBD. And, when a number of state attorneys general, started to test to see whether those were accurate, that was accurate labeling, they found out it wasn't accurate labeling at all. Because, they would take, I don't know, like this sample, from this plant of this strain, and then test it for THC and CBD content. Well, it depends where on the plant you're actually taking the sample. It could be different, if you take it from different portions of the plant. In addition, like, the growing conditions matter, the soil matters, the water matters, the light matters, all these things matter in terms of the ultimate, chemical, soup that you're going to be, consuming, in cannabis, in the little packet or whatever, however you actually get it. So there's a great deal, I guess the take-home message here is, these are complicated plant sources of multiple, potentially psychoactive chemicals, including all of these phytocannabinoids, terpenes, other chemicals, that can have individual sort of drug actions and effects, but also sort of synergistic, kinds of drug actions and effects.